This video was brought to you by Squarespace. There are many people in this world, and there are many websites, and there are many people who need websites. If you are among these many people, then there is only one thing that you need. Squarespace makes building a website easy as pie, even if you have zero prior knowledge. The intuitive builder lets you add images and video and text and anything else you want, format it in whatever way suits your fancy, and before long you have built yourself a slick-looking site without writing a single line of code. You can make just about any kind of site, a storefront, something for your business, a portfolio, whatever. Squarespace also offers lots of cool extensions if you need some extra juice. My site, Arlo Recommends, is a simple blog, so I just create a bunch of content, schedule it to publish and push to social media automatically, then sit back and watch the analytical data roll in. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now for today's recommendation: grill gloves. I've recommended silicone gloves in the past, but I am upgrading this one to grill gloves. They're perfect for when you need to handle a lot of hot stuff while maintaining some dexterity and without constantly slipping in and out of the things. I barely even use mine when I grill, I just use them in the kitchen. Thanks again to Squarespace. Now, there are many videos in this world, but only one that is starting now. So cloudy. During the big Switch 2 Direct, Nintendo revealed, among many other things, Switch 2 Edition games. The idea of games receiving big graphical updates, essentially remasters for Switch 2, was already exciting. I was certainly hoping that some of the Switch games releasing this year would get some sort of cross-gen treatment, but to our surprise, we learned that some Switch 2 Edition games will be older games that are also receiving brand new content exclusive to Switch 2. For games like Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which never received any substantial DLC and, seemed as though it never would, Switch 2 editions have suddenly opened the door for old games to get new content and features, even years after the fact. Meat's back on the menu, boys. I already made that joke, but that was on topic, Arlo, so it didn't count. There are plenty of Switch games that felt really deserving of DLC, but weirdly never got it, so naturally this renewed hope is great. But there is one disappointing element to all this. Is it the $80 game? Not today. The disappointing part is, what does all this mean for basic backwards compatibility? Essentially, all Switch games could benefit humongously from even basic performance patches that help them run at higher resolutions and frame rates and all that on the new hardware. I mean, here we've got a pretty darn big library of really gorgeous games that are unfortunately held back from true greatness by a lack of horsepower. The best case scenario has always been that more or less every notable Switch title would get a basic patch of this kind. That essentially every time you run an old Switch game on the new system, it runs a lot better. No more choppy frame rates, no more blurry images. Well, at least at the moment, that best case scenario is unfortunately not the scenario we find ourselves in. Nintendo has told us that some games may, in theory, run better on Switch 2 right out of the box with no patches. I assume that this would include games with dynamic resolution scaling and uncapped frame rates. I don't know, maybe load times could be better as well, but I don't know much about any of that, and I'm trying not to get my hopes up in that department. More concretely, Nintendo has indeed announced that games receiving free patches is on the table. They're not all just going to be Switch 2 editions, which perhaps should come as a relief, seeing as nothing is ever certain with Nintendo. But the problem is that the list of games that they have so far announced to be receiving these free patches is pretty darn small. It includes ARMS, Captain Toad, Mario Odyssey, 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, Clubhouse Games, Link's Awakening and Echoes of Wisdom, thank goodness, Game Builder Garage, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, thank extra goodness, and Big Brain Academy. So 11 games will get free patches. And, technically, we don't know precisely what is in store for each individual game. The Nintendo website gives us this description. Free updates to improve playability on the Nintendo Switch 2 system will be released for select Nintendo Switch games. By connecting your Nintendo Switch 2 to the internet, you can download free updates that may improve performance or add support for features such as game share in select games. The contents of these free updates will differ depending on the game. For all we know, some games may just get game share and not much else. It's technically possible, but at the moment, I think I am fairly confident in at least basic performance boosts. I could be wrong, but I'm willing to go out on the limb at least that far. And yes, this tiny list is fairly disappointing. If performance patches are simply not a given for every title, and we never get a chance to play Thousand Year Door at 60 FPS, for instance, it will be a crime against humanity. I don't know, maybe Nintendo will drip feed these free patches to us over the next few years. They add to the occasional NSO and music app updates. That would be better than nothing, certainly, but at the moment, nothing is guaranteed. The prospect of some games just simply getting left behind entirely is scary. However, you know how the Hubble telescope pulled some of the most, startlingly full images from the blankest parts of the sky? Well, similarly, perhaps our imaginations can be ignited by the huge list of games that have been left unmentioned through all this. Lying between the small handful of games getting free patches and the even smaller handful of announced Switch 2 editions, there is a huge library of titles that are now potential candidates for shiny new editions with new features and content. And this has me dreaming of all the possibilities.
Even though they're all gonna be $80!
Not today. Not today. Today, I would like to figure out which Switch games outside of these two categories are candidates for Switch 2 editions and what kinds of content they might receive. I do firmly believe that any game getting a free patch will probably not receive a Switch 2 edition, but furthermore, I also think that re-releases are not on the table. I could be wrong, I'd love to be wrong, but I feel like if Nintendo was gonna create new content for these older games, they would have done it already, I don't see them remastering or remaking a game, then remastering again for Switch 2, and only then adding new stuff to it. So I'm not including any re-releases of any kind. And also keep in mind that this list isn't completely comprehensive. I might miss a few games, especially if they didn't sell a lot of copies, because I really can't see Nintendo creating a whole fancy Switch 2 edition with a physical retail presence and all that for anything that didn't do that well the first time around. I mean, hey, if we get some Switch 2 editions that are only released as a digital purchase and not a physical copy on store shelves, then that does open the door a lot wider for smaller games. But right now, I am currently assuming that Switch 2 editions are gonna be bigger games that are designed for store shelves. For the most part, I do believe that I've included the vast majority of notable first-party or otherwise Switch-exclusive third-party games on this list. So we're gonna look at each one and decide what is most likely to get a nice, big, juicy next-gen upgrade. To start things off with some Pokemon games, it is true that Legends ZA is getting a Switch 2 edition. No extra content, really, just for better performance, and there is also a precedent for the Pokemon Company releasing newer, definitive versions of older games. However, in this case, we've got Legends Arceus and Sword and Shield. It just doesn't really seem necessary. Legends Arceus is kind of being more or less replaced by Legends ZA right now. That's where they're gonna want to put all their focus. And then they have just come so far beyond Sword and Shield. We'll probably get the next generation next year, so it's a whole 2 generations behind us now. It just doesn't seem really necessary. If it's not a 3rd edition or a DLC or a complete, many generations later remake, then I don't know, I think they would rather just kind of move on to the next thing. However, if you want to look at spin-offs, I would say new Pokemon Snap is like it's a decent prospect. The game did not sell as much as I would have imagined, but it's possible that they'd want to return to it and do like a definitive edition. If they did do a Switch 2 edition, it could have like some new areas in it or something, maybe even a new little mini campaign. It's really hard to say if the product itself is important enough to bring back around again and to like put on store shelves and all that stuff. But I don't know. I'd still give it like a solid maybe. I could see it happening. And then next, I would say that Kirby is in a little bit of a similar situation where, yes, Kirby in the Forgotten Land is getting a Switch 2 edition, and that one is getting like brand new content, which is totally cool. But then when you look at the Switch's other original Kirby game, Star Allies, it really just does feel like something that's Nintendo's probably just gonna kind of leave in the past. It did perform really well for a Kirby game, but Forgotten Land just kind of overshadows the whole thing, and, you know, Star Allies already did get an okay amount of post-launch content. I guess I just don't really see what they would do with it, like why exactly we would need to get like a new version with new content and stuff, so I'd say probably not super likely. They're probably just gonna focus on Forgotten Land Switch 2 Edition for the time being, as they cook up the next thing. But then, could you say the same thing more or less about Metroid? If we're getting a Metroid Prime 4 Switch 2 edition, then does that mean that we are less likely to get a Switch 2 edition of Metroid Dread? I mean, if anything, that is the Switch's one completely original, exclusive to the Switch Metroid game. I mean, golly, I really, really would love a Switch 2 edition of Prime Remastered, but I don't think that's gonna happen. And then we're not talking about re-releases right now. So yeah, Metroid Dread. It is an original Metroid game, and I really would love to see it running with better graphics and whatnot. So it's not a terrible contender, and it sold well for a Metroid game. It's really just like, what would they bring to a Switch 2 edition? We might as well just get like a performance patch or something. I mean, it really doesn't even need like a full remaster treatment or whatever. I just don't know what they would do. I don't know what kind of content they would bring to it. I would mostly just like to see it running better, so a Switch 2 edition is not necessarily out of the question. I just don't know if I see Nintendo feeling that it's necessary, you know? I want to believe it's possible. It sure would be nice, but yeah, I mean, really, if anything, a performance patch is kind of all that game needs. You know, that's a lot of maybes and no's. Let's hit a real contender. Animal Crossing New Horizons. And now, like many games on this list, it really just does depend on Nintendo's own plans. Obviously, Animal Crossing was a really huge deal on the Switch. They are going to want to try to recreate that in whatever way they can. It kind of just depends on when we can expect to get a new Animal Crossing game. I mean, really, it could come at any point in the generation. However, it has been long enough since New Horizons that, I mean, they could announce one for next year, this year, you know, at any given Nintendo Direct, they could announce a new one, especially because of the Switch 2's social features. They're probably going to be pretty excited to give us a new version and integrate all of that. So if that's the case, then no, we're probably not going to get a Switch 2 edition of New Horizons. However, if they were still a good handful of years out from giving us a brand new one, I definitely could see New Horizons being an in the meantime game. I could easily see a version of New Horizons with like integrated game chat, maybe more smooth online, and then of course just like running better overall. They wouldn't really need a lot of new content. I don't even know if Nintendo would, because they did give it a fair amount of content after the fact, and they did end up giving some DLC. I would hope that they would include the DLC in a Switch 2 edition. Obviously, Zelda has told us that is not a guarantee at this point. But I could see it, definitely. If it's gonna be any more than a couple years to get a new Animal Crossing, then yeah, like pretty much as soon as possible, they should give us an Animal Crossing New Horizons Switch 2 edition. That is a very, very strong contender. I would even give that the highest likelihood rating. Let's flip back the other way now and talk about Wario, though. Unfortunately, WarioWare Get It Together and WarioWare Move It, the two original WarioWare games on the Switch, neither really sold very well, like, at all. I don't even know if Move It cracked 1 million. I don't know. And then, of course, there's compatibility issues. Move It uses like the IR sensor for some games. So if you were gonna play it on Switch 2, you would either need like a new version that's been altered or to hook up your old Joy-Cons to it. So I think basically no chance of either of those games getting Switch 2 editions, unfortunately. And then we have a similar situation with 1-2 Switch and Everybody 1-2 Switch. In the case of the former, the compatibility issue, the IR sensor, the Switch 2 Joy-Cons just do not have that. And then in the case of Everybody 1-2 Switch, I think about like 19-ish people bought the game. I think that's the current estimate, so I don't think Nintendo is going to be rushing to give us a sweet, fancy $80 Switch 2 edition anytime soon. And then another similar compatibility issue, Ring Fit Adventure. It was actually a very, very, very huge surprise success on the Switch. But in order to play it on the Switch 2, you've got to hook up an old pair of Joy-Cons with the IR sensor if you want to get all the features. And then, of course, the Joy-Cons, the way they fit into the ring and the pouch. They would have to, like, give us a brand new set of hardware or expect us to use the old hardware. And I don't know, I really don't see all that happening. If anything, they may just give us a sequel down the line. Even that isn't really a guarantee, but if anything, that's what I see happening. No Switch 2 edition. Speaking of fitness, though, we've got Nintendo Switch Sports, and I would actually say this is another pretty darn good contender. Switch Sports is that game that nobody talks about, and yet sold like mad. Nintendo and motion-controlled sports. I don't know, apparently even after all these years, it is still a winning formula. It just has very, very broad appeal. And it's a multiplayer game, so yeah, I could absolutely imagine a definitive Switch 2 version, and it's got a couple new sports in there. There's always more sports that you could add, and then integrated game chat or something. I mean, as with anything, it's also just as likely that Nintendo is producing a new version, a Switch 2 Sports. But again, this could be a fine placeholder. I could see it going either way. That's another very good contender. Next, let's take a look at the Splatoon series. We have Splatoon 2 and 3. As far as Splatoon 2 goes, it's a primarily multiplayer series. They want everybody to be playing the latest one. I don't see them doing anything with Splatoon 2. I don't think they would feel they had a reason to. 3 is possible if, again, they are still a few years out from making Splatoon 4. I could see like an early generation version of Splatoon 2, especially if it's running better and the game chat and all that stuff. It is certainly possible. But at the same time, the sequels have been coming quickly enough that I don't know if I see it. Like, if it happened, I wouldn't be surprised, but I think it is probably most likely that Nintendo is just working on Splatoon 4 at this point. I mean, if it's only been a few years between each title, I could see it as early as next year, in which case, giving support to Splatoon 3 just wouldn't really be necessary. They didn't give us a deluxe version of Splatoon 1 on Switch. They just gave us Splatoon 2. And so, yeah, I see no reason why they wouldn't just do the same again here. Especially because Splatoon is very, very popular, and when they do give us Splatoon 4, it's gonna be a really, really big deal. It's gonna be a big, grand celebration. Everybody's gonna be going crazy about it, so maybe they would wanna just kinda keep things kind of in check until they were ready to do that. Let the hype build up until they can deliver all at once with a new title. Let's look at another very, very, very strong contender though, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. As with anything, it depends on Nintendo's plans, because if they were going to give us a Smash in a couple years, then they don't want to give us Ultimate. However, we don't know what's going on with Smash. We don't know what Nintendo's plans are at all. We don't even know if Nintendo knows what they're doing. Are they going to try to make a Smash without Sakurai? How do you make a new Smash if you have already given us, the ultimate Smash? So I would say perhaps more so than any of these games. Maybe I'm going to give, absolute top likelihood to Smash Bros. Ultimate. It is such a wildly popular series. The game sold so well. There's every reason to give us a definitive Switch 2 version, especially with integrated game chat and all that stuff. It It would be perfect, and I really, really would want them to give us the DLC. I really hate that they didn't with Breath of the Wild, because it's really just made us like have to wonder, is there any hope for these Switch 2 editions to act as deluxe editions where we can expect the DLC if they give us a Smash Ultimate Switch 2 edition? Is it like, no way, we're never going to give you any of the DLC for free? Or do you think it's possible that they would give us all the Fighters Passes or whatever? I really don't know. I definitely would hope so. If they don't know what they're doing with Smash yet, then like, yeah, just give us Smash Ultimate Edition, Ultimate-ist Edition, whatever you want to call it. I think it would go over very well. I think it would sell. Okay, really though. Smash at 120 frames per second? I mean, like, I can imagine there's a pretty good amount of the fan base that would it's just slobbering at that idea. That alone would sell a pretty good number of copies, so I think they should probably just do it. Flopping back to the other side of the likelihood scale once more, we have Fire Emblem, Three Houses, and Engage. This series does well enough. It kind of feels like these games are a little bit on the lower budget side, but they also don't really sell like an absolute ton, and that really works for the series. I just think that Nintendo probably wouldn't really see much value in trying to repackage these old games as a big Switch 2 edition, especially like putting it on the retail shelves or whatever. I think it is probably most likely that they're just gonna keep working on the next one and just give us that sometime in the next couple years. So yeah, I really don't see it for Fire Emblem, and especially in the case of Three Houses, they already expanded that story with Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, so that's also kind of not super necessary. Speaking of which, we have 2 Fire Emblem Warriors games, the original and Three Hopes. Once again, this kind of just comes down to sales. Neither game sold very well. I just don't think Nintendo would care to revisit them. If anything, though, they do deserve performance patches, even if not big Switch 2 editions. Any Warriors game, they all struggle to run on the Switch, so I would hope that at least somewhere down the line, we get patches. And on that note, we have Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and it's another case where I feel like it's just probably not really worth it. We already have the new Hyrule Warriors coming out, so it's just really not that important to revisit the old one. There's really no extra content that they could give us. It was already an expansion of a previous story. Again, I would at least hope for a performance patch or something. It would be really nice, but I think a Switch 2 edition is not on the table. So hey, why don't we look at some Mario games? The Switch had a good number of Super Mario Brothers games. Let's look at those. I think all of the party and sports games are pretty much in the same boat. We've got Jamboree. It's got a Switch 2 edition with new content, but I think that was always the plan. It was always going to be kind of a cross-gen thing. I don't think we're going to see similar treatment for any of the other ones. Superstars, Super Mario Party, Mario Tennis Aces, Mario Strikers, Battle League, Mario Golf, Super Rush. As I talked about in a recent video, I really don't feel like Nintendo is interested in like supporting these games. I think for the most part, they would rather just work on the next one, give us like the carousel of games. That's why we don't really get DLC for them. Super Mario Party ended up getting an online mode like after the fact, but I really do think that was just so that they could test online for future titles, because yeah, for the most part, they don't support these games. They just make them, and they're inevitable, and they will always come. So I do not see Switch 2 editions for any of them. On the more positive side, though, you have Super Mario Maker 2, and I would say that out of all the games on this list, this one probably depends the most on Nintendo's plans. Because one of the most interesting potential applications for the Switch 2's mouse mode is going to be games like Mario Maker, where you're wanting to manipulate a bunch of stuff on screen. The original Mario Maker, you could use the touch screen. It wasn't quite as good on the Switch. So obviously, mouse controls for Mario Maker game, it's a match made in heaven. I mean, it's basically like going back to Mario Paint with the mouse. Like, it's just perfect. So if Nintendo decides to continue giving us regular old, like traditional 2D Mario Makers, then they're not going to return to Mario Maker 2. They're going to give us a brand new one with big mouse functionality, integration, and all that stuff. However, if they decide to do something pretty different with the next Mario Maker, ideally some sort of 3D Mario Maker, then I feel like it is almost a guarantee that we will get Mario Maker 2 Switch 2 edition. And, you know, when they released the game, it had like the extra modes, and we always wondered if it was gonna get even more modes. There were like extra spaces to put more modes, and then they just didn't really give us any more modes, and it was kind of weird. So yeah, if the next brand new Switch 2 exclusive Mario Maker is gonna be Mario 3D Maker, then I would say absolutely 100% we are going to get Mario Maker 2 Switch 2 edition. Hopefully with extra content, with some extra modes, or at least extra features or whatever. At the very, very least, great mouse control integration. But if not, if we're just gonna get Super Mario Maker 3 on Switch 2, then yeah, I'd say probably not. Other Mario games though, we have Paper Mario: The Origami King, and it did sell pretty well for a Paper Mario game, but it was also kind of controversial. I don't know how much Nintendo is gonna wanna return to it. They haven't really talked about the game much since it released. You know, it feels like they really don't bring it up too much. So I would say a Switch 2 edition is like technically possible, but it doesn't feel super duper likely. At the very, very least, I really would like a performance patch though. Like, can you imagine how good that game would look running at a higher resolution? Like, it already looks really, really incredible. So I'd at least like to see that. Then we've got the Mario and Rabbids games, Kingdom Battle and Sparks of Hope. You know, obviously these were not developed by Nintendo. They were developed by Ubisoft, but they were Switch exclusives. And, you know, technically it's up to Ubisoft whether or not they want to do that. But because it's Ubisoft, I would say they're definitely not gonna do that, because both games, they sold like okay, but even though I believe Sparks of Hope actually outsold Kingdom Battle, if I'm not mistaken, but Davide Soliani talked about how Ubisoft told him they were upset and disappointed with the performance of the game and kind of just rained on his parade, made it clear that they were absolutely not happy with the game, and so yeah, that's not happening. Then we've got Mario and Luigi Brothership, and it's another case where I don't know if the game was successful enough to justify a big Switch 2 edition taking up space on the store shelves. It would be nice. At the same time, it doesn't really I mean, you know, you could use new content. You always could. There could be some other little extra modes or extra little story chapter or something, maybe. For the most part, though, I just want a performance patch. I'm bummed that they haven't announced one already. It's really mostly what the game needs. It just needs to run at a higher and more consistent frame rate and a higher resolution. It's like a little bit fuzzy and a little bit choppy. That's really all I want. Here's a game though. Here's a game right here. Super Mario Bros. Wonder. This is another case where I'm giving it the highest likelihood possible. It came out recently enough that I think we can basically be 100% sure that we're not gonna get another original 2D Mario for a good number of years. Like, it'll be a good bit through the Switch 2 generation at the earliest. And so I think a Switch 2 edition of Mario Brothers Wonder is, I don't know. Maybe this is the game with the absolute highest likelihood, because it just feels like a guarantee at this point. It never got DLC, even though it felt like it could have used DLC. Even New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe got DLC. I mean, the 3DS one got DLC. There was really no reason why it wouldn't get DLC, but it released so late in the Switch generation that I'm sure Nintendo had time to plan all of this. They probably knew that they would be doing a Switch 2 edition, and they would just save the new content for that. And I'm imagining that beautiful game running at 4K or something like it on the screen, and in my mind, it is amazing. Now, we must ask ourselves, if Mario Wonder is going to get a Switch 2 edition, what kind of extra content might it include? I really do think in this case, it would not quite be enough just to give us better performance and textures or whatever and game chat integration. It would need to be some extra content. I think it will be. Fortunately, in the case of Mario Wonder, it's not super hard. It doesn't have to be really complex. It really just needs like DLC, like what we would have imagined from DLC. It could be another bonus world, just kind of like a collection of levels, you know, a new section of the map opens up or something. I think new badges, especially ones that you could use in the base game, I think that would be great. Yeah, basically just new levels and new badges and maybe some new little challenges or whatever here and there. I mean, some kind of like new feature or a new type of level would be kind of cool, but it could also be pretty basic. Just some more content while we wait for the next 2D Mario. That'd be cool. Some actual bosses would certainly be nice. I would not be opposed to that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Can't really say guarantee. You never really know with Nintendo, but I think that's basically a guarantee. Then we have Mario adjacent games. We have Luigi's Mansion 3, which is really hard to say because that game did sell really, really well, so it should be a fine candidate. On the other hand, I really just don't know what they would do in terms of like adding content to it. I don't know what kind they could do, like a little mini campaign, an extra little place that you explore, or they do like the Forgotten Land kind of thing where they take what they already have and kind of add something to it. I would really like that. It did feel like the game was like so close to utmost greatness. If they just tweaked it and added a little bit more stuff, like more to do with your money, maybe, then that would be great. So perhaps Luigi's Mansion 3 is a pretty okay candidate. Yeah, at the same time, not exactly sure what they would do, and I'm sure Luigi's Mansion 4 is, I mean, it's definitely in production. I really expect to see it pop up basically anytime. So I suppose it's another case where it kind of just comes down to Nintendo's plans. I could see it going either way. Princess Peach Showtime, part of me feels like it's a little less likely because it did not sell as well as I think Nintendo might have been hoping. Wasn't like terrible, but definitely not like Mario numbers or even Luigi's Mansion numbers. The game was also a little bit divisive. It had a little bit of a limited audience, but at the same time, it did release recently enough that I think Nintendo could still have some sort of interest in it. I could see a new version and it runs better, and it would be pretty easy to tack content onto that game. You just add another like bonus level of the theater with a couple new levels or something. Like, maybe. A pretty solid maybe. Yoshi's Crafted World is technically kind of another maybe. Possibly, but at the same time, it's another game that was a little bit divisive. People were not, like, overwhelmingly positive about it. I liked it, but I get, most people believe it was not as good as Woolly World, so it might just not be popular enough. It might not have sold enough to justify a brand new Switch 2 edition, so probably not super likely. Next, we've got Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3. I think we can be basically certain that these aren't gonna get Switch 2 editions. Each one was already expanded with a pretty dramatic amount of extra content. We just got the remaster of X, and we know that the next Xenoblade game is coming. They're always coming. They release them at a pretty darn good pace now, so it's really just not necessary. Performance patches are necessary. Like really though, why was that not already on the list? Come on, these big open world games, it's a miracle they're running on the Switch at all. So like, yeah, come on, give us the patches. We're closing in on the end here. We've got a little handful of non-Nintendo developed third-party exclusives. We've got Astral Chain, Bayonetta 2, and Bayonetta 3. Really, none of these games sold very well at all. So unfortunately, I think for that reason alone, we're not really likely to see a Switch 2 edition. There's just really not that much of a need, not enough of an audience for it, unfortunately. And finally, let's quickly and casually breeze through the final game on the list, which is coming. Oh, okay. Okay, so Pikmin 4. I want to believe that I am coming from a neutral perspective and not just saying what I want to be true. I really and honestly do believe that Pikmin 4 is one of the games with the highest likelihood of receiving a Switch 2 edition. It's another one where I'm almost certain, because it's another game that came out in the last few years It's another game that felt like it was ripe for DLC. I know that, like, sure, it was already big and had a lot of content, but, like, I did a whole video about it. I'm not gonna go over here. I feel like the game is a perfect candidate for DLC. It's also an incredibly gorgeous game that I would love to see with, like, some sort of at least slightly remastered version running on Switch 2. It's a Pikmin game, so mouse controls would be absolutely really, honestly, it's not, I'm not just saying this. I'm not just saying it because I want it. Pikmin 4. At this point, I'm just about ready to bet money that we are going to get a Switch 2 edition sometime in the next couple years. Am I getting my hopes up? Absolutely. As for what kind of content we could expect, it is possible that they could give us just another, like, little mini campaign, the kind that we already see with Olimar in the regular game. That would be very, very easy to tack on. If they wanted to be kind of lazy, it could just be a collection of Dandori challenges. That's also a possibility. Or even just a new level to explore with new survivors and new treasures, and it doesn't really, like, change the story at all. It's just another place to go with more stuff to collect. That could also be a thing. And then, off the top of my head, I can think of one more thing. What if? Just bear with me here. It just came to me just now. What about? I mean, you know, you got mouse controls now. What, some kind of like level editor or something? Is that crazy? Am I crazy? Just some kind of, like, you know, you could use the mouse. You could use the mouse to edit the map. You could draw paths and all that. Just something like that. I don't know. It's not a very good idea. They probably wouldn't do it. But I just, you know, if we're throwing around ideas, that might be what I personally would pick. Maybe I should not get my hopes up about that particular detail, but at the same time, maybe I should. You ever consider that? So let's summarize. Out of all candidates, I believe that Mario Wonder and Pikmin 4 are the only two games that are basically guaranteed. Like, I'm almost willing to bet money on it, and I'm sure that each one is gonna get some sort of fun new content to go along with it. Then Animal Crossing, Smash Ultimate, Splatoon 3, Switch Sports, and Mario Maker 2 are games where it depends on Nintendo's plans for each respective series. If sequels are coming soon, then probably not. But if they're still a few years off, then each of these are also extremely strong candidates. And I would say Smash and Mario Maker in particular. The former for 120 FPS gameplay and better online, and the latter for new mouse controls and hopefully some new styles. Then with Luigi's Mansion, Pokemon Snap, Metroid Dread, and Princess Peach, we've got a handful of games here that maybe aren't super likely, but if any of them did get Switch 2 editions, I wouldn't be shocked, especially if Nintendo does some digital-only upgrades without bothering with the retail stuff, making the process a lot simpler. Then I could really see it. Everything beyond these 11 games just doesn't really feel likely enough to me. And hey, 11 games at most, more likely only like 5 or 6? Seems like a pretty fine amount of games to help fill out the library for the first few years. So there you have it. Those are the Switch games that I expect to get Switch 2 editions. Many of which, yes, will probably cost $80. 80 big ones. Wow. That's a lot of money. And they might not even include all the DLC. Like what if we get Smash and it doesn't have all the fighters? Wouldn't that be greedy of Nintendo? Well, blah!